Teachers unions, desperate to keep their members from actually having to work, now claim it's racist and sexist to open the schools back up. But if you don't open up the racist and sexist schools so that they can teach their racist and sexist anti-white curriculum, then how would anybody know that the racist agenda wasn't being taught? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with that good-for-nothing Chicago Teachers Union and their latest claim that, hey, reopening the schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. Well, there's a certain logic to this, right? They've already said, progressive educators, that traditional American education is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. The progressive left has already said that every single aspect of American culture is tied down with racism, sexism, and misogyny. In other words, it's all stinking racist. And so if you open the schools, you're a racist. If you don't open the schools, you're a sexist. If you keep the schools closed, you're a bigot. If you open the schools, you're exposing kids to more racism, sexism, and bigotry. And ironically, what is the school's answer to all of this racism, sexism, and misogyny on which America alone is founded? Well, you get them in school, and you teach them more racism, bigotry, and misandry. Instead of hating women, you teach them to hate men. So does it really matter if you keep them opened or closed? Boil this all down. What the Chicago Teachers Union wants is what all the teachers union wants. We should be paid whether we teach or not. If your kids, we're going to do a story later in the week about a complete, I believe tomorrow, about a complete exodus from the public school. You think it was bad a year ago. Now we're 8 months ago. Now we're finding hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids in major liberal school districts like Los Angeles and Massachusetts and Virginia are fleeing the public schools. But the public schools don't care about that. The only way they want the kids there is because they get paid per kid. The public schools want us, and they're going to get this under a Joe Biden administration. Public school teachers and public school unions will be funded under Biden. You watch, mark my words. Will be funded not on the number of school kids that they teach, because they're losing school kids, but simply by a formula that allows them to get paid even for the kids who've lost, right? So what is the capacity of the school? If the school capacity is 500 kids, and 400 of those kids have homeschooled because they got a crappy education, that school will be paid the amount of 500 students because that's the capacity. This is what the teachers unions are pushing for, to be paid regardless of the kids in the classroom. This is what Democrats have said they've wanted, and this is what the teachers unions are just about to get.
Well, and specifically now with the Chicago Teachers Union and their tweet that they put out, they're supposed to be educators and well-spoken, and this is the best they came up with. The push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. And I see they did not include a comma after racism, but that's just my own grammar.
No, the death of the Oxford comma is one of the great outrages. That's called
one. That's
called the Oxford comma, where you would have sexism,
racism,
all
comma,
three.
And misogyny.
I absolutely am with you that the Oxford comma ought to be replaced in American English, standard American English.
But that's not actually the reason that they took down that tweet, although with good reason they should have taken down that tweet for the Oxford comma. But anyway, they deleted the tweet and claimed that they were actually thankful. They were thankful for the ridicule or the feedback that they received from those in the struggle. Right on. So then the next day, they actually decided, we're going to put up another tweet. Let's, round two. Let's see what we do. This time, they wrote, breaking. We have just filed an injunction against Mayor Lori Lightfoot's arbitrary return to school building dates, calling on the city and CPS to bargain in good faith with our union and land enforceable safety standards before school buildings reopen. So now they're trying to take a different angle about, safety and health and all that, not racism or misogyny on this one.
Go back to that first side, that first tweet. Notice how we've reached the point in American culture where you no longer have to add any evidence of this.
Yeah, we can just blanket statements.
This is it. This is how dumbed down the American people. This is how successfully the Marxist campaign to change language in this country is. You can say those things, And you don't have to explain yourself. No. The nice thing about it, though, is there were like thousands of people pushing back against this. Thousands of people were tweeting right back, mocking the hell out of Chicago public schools, as I did in the opening teaser. So they went a different tack, as Katie pointed out, and so the second slide. And here's what now rather than blaming the country for being bigots, we want to be safe, because who could argue against safety, right? We demand what? Safety, health, what's the third one? I can't see below the line there. Maybe it doesn't say. Safety, health, and...
Equity.
Equity.
That's equity.
Of course, there you go. Equity from a virus. Well, I will tell you this. Do you notice that on both of those slides, the things, if we're training you correctly, you already saw it. The one thing you never, ever, ever, ever hear from a teachers union or a superintendent or a superstructure of a school or a typical public school teacher is a comment on actual education. Nowhere, anywhere in all of their propaganda do they even mention the fact that, their job is to educate kids. It never crosses the screen. It never crosses their minds. It never enters their propaganda. Your kids are just human shields. Your kids are human shields to insulate them from their own inability to teach your kids to be literate, to be reading, writing, and math ready. They're human shields whose job it is to beat those shields over the heads of taxpayers to give us more money, and less accountability. More money and less accountability is the mantra of the teachers' unions and far too many of our government schools.
So Joseph Biden, in his basement ways, has been working on picking out who's going to, be in his cabinet if he becomes president official, and then working with his transition team. The story that we're going to talk about now is actually about the people who are leading the education transition team. And Biden decided he's going to pick Stanford professor Linda Darling Hammond, who is president of the California State Board of Education as well. And as the LA Times said, Linda Darling Hammond, a leading figure in California education policy, is heading the education transition team for President-elect Joe Biden, which is not in office, where she is expected to emphasize support for teachers in traditional public schools. Nowhere did it say students.
No.
But just,
nope.
Okay.
Teachers get more money, less accountability, right? I tell you, you cannot make
the
this
kids
stuff.
Can't vote yet.
Well, if they get their way.
Yeah, well, eventually they will. But that's why who cares about the children, their education? It's just the teachers. They're the ones who vote. So let's take a look just a little bit at Ms. Darling Hammond. She wrote a 2017 book called Empowered Educators: How High-Performing Systems Shape Teaching Quality Around the World. And in this book, she talks about China and Singapore, Finland, Wales, Australia, and Canada. And as she wrote, these countries not only train individual educators well, but also they deliberately organize the sharing of expertise among teachers and administrators within and across schools so that the system as a whole becomes ever more effective. And they not only cultivate innovative practices, but also they incorporate them into the system as a whole rather than leaving them as exceptions at the margins. This book describes how this seemingly magical work is done. Yes, China does this. Mm-hmm. China talks about innovation and about cultivating innovative practices and the whole system as a whole and training. What is this actually sounding like to you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Training, not teaching.
There it is.
Right? Co-opting, conforming, indoctrinating, not learning. That's exactly what Linda Darling Hammond is all about. She's all about the big collectivist mindset she would love to see. She's a complete placeholder for whoever the Department of Education Secretary is going to be. It still may be her. I mean, there was a lot of talk it was going to be her. She would be like the perfect person for this, because what does she want to? She's a sworn enemy to private schools and charter schools. She is radically anti-homeschool. All that money belongs in the public school. It doesn't matter how much you teach. It doesn't matter that you teach your kid way better than we can. That money is our money, and you shouldn't have it.
And she has 3 names, and everyone these days who leads anything has 3 names. So in her book, she wrote specifically about China. In the 1990s, Shanghai was the first province to implement a national curriculum that broadened beyond traditional subject areas and included change toward more active kinds of pedagogy aimed at critical thinking and problem solving. National reform efforts in China have continued in this direction, focusing on encouraging more innovative and creative thinking and encouraging students to follow their interests and potential. China.
This from the largest technology and information stealing country in the history of the world. This from a country that is so methodically literally minded that they steal 90% of their technology from the West. That without Bill Clinton handing them state secrets in the early 1990s, without the complete transparency of American secrets during the Obama administration. I'm beginning to really understand this now. The thing more than anything else that doomed Donald Trump, that forced the electioneering to become as dishonest as it was and nobody care, is because Donald Trump took on China. I'm beginning to wonder if Donald Trump left China alone and kissed its great big red butt the way every other American president has, he might still be president.
Well, China rules the world, and apparently that's what this woman wants, at least, because she tweeted out in 2018 that China doesn't have as many school shootings as what we have in the U.S.
Wait, let me let that sink in.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can I raise my hand?
Dr. Duke,
does that include all the Chinese citizens who had bullets put in their head one by one in the Laogai, the Chinese camp? Were we counting them?
I'm looking in the footnotes, and no, I do not see it in the
footnotes.
Why
would you have to shoot up schools when anybody you don't like, you can just drag to your little concentration camps, the Laogai, and shoot them there? Right? Yeah, I get it. There were no school shootings in China. How many school-age children were killed? How many parents of school-age children were killed?
Yes? I do have an example here. The Washington Free Beacon actually noted how Ms. Darling ignored this, that in October of 2018, a woman stabbed 14 children in a kindergarten class. Also in April of 2018, 9 students were murdered at a middle school. So it's kind of like saying, well, in Australia there aren't shootings. Yeah, that's because they all handed in their guns. That's no one has guns. So there's stabbings, just like in London. There's so many stabbings and knife incidents happening. So ban all that too, because otherwise it's going to happen.
Well, there's no doubt that this is the perfect person to oversee the transition of, and I was joking about what transition meant at the beginning of the segment. Let me tell you now what it really means. Finishing the transition of American schools into places of learning, individuality, children coming into their own, the development of each child to be the best that they can be. That's gone now, and what you've got is the transition to the collective schoolroom, where teaching and pedagogy mirror the state, where children don't matter as individuals, they only matter as collectives, and where the primary business of the school is sociological propaganda, not learning. That's the transition that Miss Hammond is going to put the nail in the coffin.
Staying on the topic of China, we actually have our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who basically blasted what's happening with our American universities and how they are being now easy targets for China, because we know that China steals pretty much everything they can. So Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was speaking at Georgia Tech, and he warned that U.S. colleges and universities are just easy targets. His words, easy targets to infiltrate and bring influence for Beijing's benefit. So Pompeo actually warned all those in attendance of Xi Jinping's total control of China and how he's trying to basically become the number one superpower in the whole world and steal everything he can. And he explained how it's our free societies, or free societies around the world. We are the ones who are developing and creating, and it's not communist China.
The Chinese Communist Party knows it can never match our innovation. It has state-owned enterprise. It's an authoritarian regime. It is a government-centric focus. It's why it sends 400,000 students a year to the United States of America to study. 400,000 students a year studying in our universities come from one country. It is no accident. Much of the high-end industrial base inside of China is based on stolen technology or technology purchased from other nations. It's not homegrown.
I am absolutely stunned that a university like Georgia Tech would allow an ex-cabinet member, an ex-official in the administration like Pompeo to address the school. There's got to be something behind that. This must not have been done for students. This must be some aspect of Georgia Tech, because it doesn't strike me as something that a modern American university would be willing to do. Invite a guy like that to come and tell this kind of truth. But to go back to what Pompeo said, he made the observation that American colleges are easy targets. with all due respect, Mr. Pompeo, they are not easy targets. They are willing conspirators. We did a show on this yesterday about Chinese meddling in American universities and how complicit the administration of most of our American universities are in taking this money and pretending they don't. They know what the Chinese are up to, and they're taking the money anyway. These are not easy targets. These are willing, guilty, and treasonous conspirators. They are not easy targets.
Well, he did make sure he highlighted talking about all of this. And he throughout the entire speech, if you listen to the whole thing, he talked about how what's happening is China sends all, the 400,000 students per year, and he wants, if they can, all 400,000 to go back and tell China exactly what it is. And he's saying it's why China actually spends so much money to these universities, obviously, is to get all that information and persuade professors, which we've seen numerous stories, Harvard included, of professors being bought off from China itself.
Handing
to like
sensitive information over for money.
And they're just greasing the skids with all of that. And he made sure to actually highlight Chinese nationals who are law-abiding, who live in actual fear about learning and in following the American way, that what China is going to do to them. There are good Chinese people. We're not trying to say there aren't.
Of course there are.
I don't want anyone misinterpreting that.
But again, ask yourself this, what you know about the Chinese communist government. You think the Chinese communist government is going to invest in sending you, a typical Chinese youngster, to America to study?
Just for funsies?
Just for shits and giggles? You think that's going to happen? It's not going to happen. Because what's going to happen is if you do that, a lot of these kids who know nothing else but tyranny will begin to see what freedom looks like. No, you're sending 400,000 kids, but you're sending the 400,000 kids who you can most reliably believe are going to stay loyal to your communist regime, going to report back and undermine and infiltrate, not the ones that are coming here for an actual education.
And then for the ones who actually are coming here because they want a better way of life, because they want to be educated, Secretary Pompeo did make a stark contrast between those people who actually live in real fear for what could happen maybe not to them, but their families back home because of what's happening over here. The stark contrast between their actual fear and need of safe spaces compared to, typical American students' need for a safe space from ideas. Take a look.
But look, the CCP doesn't just target Chinese nationals. They want to influence American students as well. Professors and administrators, too. Look, they know that left-leaning college campuses are rife with anti-Americanism and present easy targets for their anti-American messaging. It's why they planted Confucius Institutes on our campuses. And under President Trump, our State Department has made very clear these Confucius Institutes are literally up to no good. Many have gone away. Many campuses have seen that, and they've chosen to close down these institutes. But right here in Georgia, Wesleyan College still has one in Macon. Look, it's why there are groups on campuses called Chinese Student Scholars Association here too. They're directed and almost always funded by the Chinese embassy or a local Chinese consulate. Its purpose, to keep tabs on students and to press pro-Beijing causes.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago, I had in one of my interim classes, I had a young Chinese woman. She was very, very intelligent. She was about 10 years older than the other kids, very well-spoken and very, very processed. So much so that she sounded like Siri. And I had the very vague understanding that either she was spying on the class or she was here for some other reason. It was very odd. I've only had that happen. Look, like you mentioned, I've had a number of Chinese kids, many of whom were absolutely delightful. But this one, there's something very processed about her. And by the end of the class, we'd gotten a little bit to know each other, and she let down some of that mask. It turns out she really enjoyed reading Shakespeare. So she wanted to know if, what should she do to get, I said to her, look, since you like Shakespeare, we haven't had to read a lot, I'm going to mail you a copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. And I did. I dropped a copy of the complete works of Shakespeare in the mail for her. She gave me a mailing address. I never heard from her again, and the book never made it to her. Right? It was all dead. By the time we arranged that and I sent the book, all that was fake information. So not sure what to make of any of this, but Pompeo is exactly right here, and I emphasize they are not our universities, are not easy targets. They are willing conspirators in far too many cases.
It's time now for some real education. Frida Kahlo was a Mexican painter known for her many self-portraits, portraits, and works inspired by the nature and artifacts of Mexico. Inspired by the country's popular culture, she employed a naive folk art style to explore questions of identity, post-colonialism, gender, class, and race in Mexican society. Kahlo has been described as a surrealist or a magical realist. She's known for painting about her experience of chronic pain.
She is a fascinating woman. Her politics are far too left for me. And the farther in her career you go, the more her paintings are that socialism imposes over them. But this is actually her first real self-portrait. She did a lot of them. Take a look at the image. It's a beautiful image, actually. It's a example. There's nothing political about this. She's a young woman in the prime of life, a beautiful young woman. She is obviously painting somewhat abstractly. And as a matter of fact, it's obvious that what she's doing here is she's doing her own version of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. You may remember that very famous Renaissance painting of Venus being born out of a clamshell with the same kind of rollicking waves behind her. But that's a very light and airy picture. This is a dark and somber one. It's a very serious young woman. As a matter of fact, she painted this portrait for a young boyfriend, a young boy she was in love with, who had just dumped her as a way to try to get him back. So again, this is Frida Kahlo's first self-portrait. It was painted as a gift for her student boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, who had left her. It was given as a token of love by which she hoped to restore his affection and keep her in his thoughts. Her plea for his love worked, and not long after Alejandro received the portrait, they were back together. But the aristocratic pose here that she takes in the painting is a mimicking of the Renaissance period I already mentioned, the Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Also a painting, by the way, that Alejandro admired. The same style would later appear in her portrait of Alicia Gallant in 1927. Frida began this self-portrait in the summer of 1926, sent it to Alejandro in late September, and on the back of the painting, she inscribed it as a dedication for Alex, Frida Kahlo, at the age of 17. September 26th. Beautiful work for a 17-year-old. Turns out that the aristocratic nature of the young man's parents would drive them apart. They never would be a couple for very long. And Kahlo's work would become much more politically infused and much more radical as she went forward. But it's one of the few paintings that modern art historians don't pay much attention to because it's not radically pro-Marxist. It's just also, I think, really why I like it. It's before she gets too mired up in politics.
All right, before we go, just a little reminder that the best way to keep up with us and our various shows at Freedom Project is to follow us on Parler. So take 10 seconds. Start following at Duke Pesta, at Katie, and at Freedom Project. Now we want to take that special little moment in the show to show some love for one of our Patriot Club members. And today we're going to give a shout out to Kathy from Boulder, Colorado, way out west. So thank you, Kathy, for supporting the show. And if you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support our Patriot Club, and we're going to send you an awesome tumbler. All you have to do to sign up is visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us. Now, as always, we're going to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. In Texas, it is actually illegal for someone to milk someone else's cow. You also can't shoot a buffalo from the second story of a hotel. It's very specific. But if you see Bigfoot, you can legally shoot him.
And that's going to do it for this show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friend.